Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rikki Neave. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Rikki Neave on the day of his tragic death matched with James Watson, who was a teenager at the time and had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite his mother's harsh way of raising her children, she seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her actions, driving her to seek justice for her son's murder. Rikki's sisters were also determined to unravel the mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what truly happened in the household where Rikki and his sisters were raised, and what events occurred on the day of Rikki's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? Sheila LaBar, also known as Rikki Neave, was born on March 4, 1988, in the city of Peterborough, located in the county of Cambridgeshire, in England, to Trevor Harvey and Ruth Ann Gregg. Ruth's life had been marked by turmoil from an early age, with her being placed in foster care at the mere age of 2. Her younger brother, who was born blind at the tender age of 1, had already been placed in foster care. She endured a challenging journey through various foster homes before returning to her parents' care, forever changed by the abuse and insults she suffered while she was under foster care. Her empathy and affection dwindled with time, which was an observation made and reported by her mother to the authorities, a struggle that the mother had been dealing with too for quite some time. Tragedy struck again when Ruth's parents took their own lives as a suicide pact later on, leaving her to face the world alone once again. At 16, she met Trevor Harvey, settled in Cambridgeshire, and gave birth to their first child, Rebecca Maria Harvey, in 1986. They had their second child, Rikki, 2 years later. Their happiness was short-lived, as Trevor and Ruth separated when Rikki was only 3, but Ruth met Dean Neave not long after. They married and welcomed their first daughter into the world and named her Sheila Neave. The family later moved into the Welland estate in Peterborough in 1992. Ruth decided to change Rikki's surname to match her new husband's, and he was now known as Rikki Neave. Sometime later, they welcomed another daughter and named her Sheridan Neave. They lived in Red Mile Walk, which was a part of the Welland estate that was well known for its association with crime and drug use. Unfortunately, the family's new home was riddled with challenges, as Dean Neave was a notorious drug dealer, and Ruth had succumbed to addiction. She would even spend a lot on drugs, to a point of neglecting her children's basic needs. Rikki and his sisters often wandered the estate without proper care, food, or clothing, drawing concern from neighbors who bravely reported the situation to social services. Rikki was the one who took care of his siblings when they were starved, as he would nick something from the shops and bring it to feed his siblings. He loved being clean, so he also made sure they were clean by running a bath for them. Dean was rarely at home, and Ruth often blamed Rikki for this, claiming that he was always away since he hated his stepson. This made her start hating Rikki, as she would write to Dean during his prison stints how she had hurt him by punching him and burning him with matches, and how she even wanted to kill him. She hated him more as she claimed that he would always laugh at her. The neighbors, often seeing the children outside, had no idea what really happened in that house. Ruth tormented and degraded the innocent children, frequently burning them with cigarettes and hurling insults at them. At one point, she even wrote "idiot" on their foreheads and forbade them from removing it. She would force them to stand for long periods of time while she smacked them on the head. She sent them to buy her drugs even after starving them. An allegation surfaced that she had been seen dangling Rikki by his ankles over a bridge. On one occasion, she forced Rikki to swallow liquid soap, and as he struggled to breathe, he managed to say, "I love you, Mommy." She would strangle the daughters to unconsciousness and even beat them with a hairbrush to the point of breaking it. They were even locked naked in rooms full of urine. The children tried to get the attention of their neighbors, which was often in vain, as their cries were not heard by them. Rikki was placed on the at-risk register after Ruth warned the child services repeatedly that she would kill him. He was taken into short-term care to give the mother some time. However, his files were mismanaged. Ruth, despite the clear evidence of the burns, cuts, and bruises on the children, would get away with it through her false explanations and excuses of accidents, and even blaming Rikki for being clumsy on his part. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Rikki Neave on the day he died tragically matched that of James Watson, the teenage killer who had managed to evade justice for a long time. Despite her cruelty in raising her children, Rikki's mother seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her unforgiving actions, which drove her to seek her son's killer. Rikki's sisters were also determined to unravel the puzzling mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what really happened in the household where Rikki and his sisters were raised? And what occurred on the day of Rikki's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? On January of 1995, Ruth was suspected of murdering her own son during that very month. She faced charges of cruelty and neglect under the Children's Act and appeared at Peterborough Magistrates' Court, accused of cruelty towards Rikki and one of her other children. In May of 1995, Ruth was charged with the murder of her son and offenses of cruelty to him and 2 of his sisters. Her trial began the following year, in October 1996, at the Northampton Crown Court. Prosecutors told the jury that Rikki and his siblings were treated with cruelty and neglect, backed by witness statements. The prosecution concluded that Rikki was killed in a sacrifice by his mother, based on her numerous death threats to him. Ruth admitted to charges of neglect and cruelty, but denied any involvement in her son's murder. The case hinged on the testimony of a policeman who stated that he had not found the child's body during his search of the woods, where Rikki was eventually discovered on the night of his disappearance. The prosecution claimed the officer might have missed it in the dark. The jurors acquitted Ruth, convinced that she couldn't have moved Rikki's body since the police were with her at the said time. However, she was sentenced to 7 years in jail for the cruelty towards Rikki and his sisters, charges to which she had already confessed. Ruth was released in 2000, but the killer remained a mystery. In 2008, she met Gary Rogers, who married her. By then, Rikki's murder had become a cold case, and the police had given up. Rogers promised Ruth that he would give her all the support she needed to reopen the case and try to find the killer. In 2013, with the help of Cambridgeshire Times editor John Elworthy, they worked tirelessly to campaign for the reopening of the case, and eventually succeeded. Rogers secured the original files from Ruth's former solicitor, a collection of 13 boxes with 8 to 12 ring binders filled with papers, and diligently read through each one. They met Paul Fulwood, the head of the local major crime unit at the time, who listened to the evidence they had and saw the reviews that the police had done beforehand. He thought the original hypothesis of Ruth being the killer was fanciful at best, and the more he looked at it, the more he became convinced that they needed to investigate further. Mr. Fulwood organized a cold case investigation with a new team made up of staff not involved in the original investigation. With fresh perspective, determination, and what they deemed as a stroke of luck, new evidence that would help solve the crime was found in the forensic archives. The crucial evidence was a piece of sellotape used to collect fibers from Rikki's clothes. Advancements in DNA technology in recent years have played a crucial role in solving cold cases, bringing justice for victims whose killers were thought to have gotten away, and providing closure to family and friends. An unidentified DNA was found on Rikki's clothes, and forensic tests matched it to none other than James Watson. At the time of Rikki's death, Watson was only 13 and lived at Woodgate's Children's Home in Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away from Peterborough. He had moved there from foster care in March of 1994. On November 25, 1994, 3 days before Rikki's murder, Watson had asked his mother about a young child found dead in the woods. His mother, having no clue what he was talking about, brushed off the conversation, assuring him that nobody had heard of such a thing happening. Little did she know that he would be the one behind such an atrocity just 3 days later. Watson was questioned by the police after several witnesses claimed to have seen them together on that fateful day, but he vehemently denied it, stating he was nowhere near Rikki and that he only caught a glimpse of him. The mother also said nothing about the conversation they had just some days prior about the made-up scenario of the young child in the woods that would materialize in less than a week with an almost similar description to what had actually happened. The police did not further challenge him, perhaps due to ignorance or their preference for the idea of Ruth being the killer and not some disturbed teenager. They probably didn't know he was disturbed until later. Watson was, of course, searched for and arrested in April 2016 in connection with Rikki's murder. By then, he was already a serial offender with a criminal record that included stealing cars and an arson attack at a British transport police station back in 2008. Questioned by the new investigation team about his DNA ending up on Rikki's clothes, Watson changed the story he had initially given to the police. He now said that he might have lifted Rikki to help him see over a fence. This statement started getting him into further trouble. The police tested his claim and found footage from 1994 showing the estate being redeveloped. They discovered that the fence was not built when Rikki Neave was still there, as it was constructed after he was already murdered. The investigators were therefore able to prove that Watson was not only a fantasist, but also a huge liar. However, this was still not enough to secure his conviction, so they started to pull other pieces of evidence together. It was not long until evidence was found that he had inappropriately touched a 5-year-old child when he was around 11 or 12, and his ex-girlfriend had also complained about him strangling her during sex. 2 teachers also revealed how he had become obsessed with Rikki's murder case, showing an unnatural level of interest in it, and even photocopying the front page of the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, which covered the case. More disturbing behavior had also been noted at the children's home where he lived, including him pleasing himself over pictures of young boys in underwear. He also kept a dead pheasant in his room, and it was claimed that he had on one occasion killed a bird and spread its wings in a sinister reconstruction of Rikki's murder. After being released on police bail, he left the UK 3 months later in a motorhome with another bail hostel resident. He travelled to Rotterdam, then France, and crossed the Pyrenees into Portugal. From France, he had reached out to his sister, Claire Perna, admitting that he was in serious trouble and that he had made a massive mistake. The next time he called, he reiterated that he was in deeper trouble and urgently needed to return to the UK. He had shamelessly posted pictures of himself on social media, enjoying the beaches, bragging about how he got out of the country. Seeing the pictures of Watson abroad, which were extensively covered in the media, angered Rikki's family. They knew that since he had escaped the country, even after his passport had been taken, he was definitely guilty of the act. Watson was eventually rearrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon and extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of murder by a majority of the Old Bailey jury. Previously, the court heard how Watson's sexual interest in younger boys was known to police, who had interviewed him over an allegation that he molested a 5-year-old back in 1993. The disturbing behavior was noted at Watson's children's home, and the prosecution claimed it was no coincidence that 3 days before the murder, Watson was the source of a bogus radio report about a 2-year-old boy being strangled. Immediately after Rikki's murder, in identical circumstances, Watson obsessed over newspaper coverage of the killing, copying front-page stories at school. The jurors heard that key evidence in the case against Watson included Rikki's last meal of Weetabix, taken in the morning, which fixed his time of death at around noon when he was seen playing with Watson. It meant that Rikki was killed shortly after heading to the woods with Watson, where he used to play. Watson's legal team had accused Rikki's mother, but she denied any involvement. Rikki's muddy Clark shoes also indicated his walk into the woods was a one-way trip, and not a case of being murdered by the mother and the body being dragged into the forest, therefore ruling out that accusation. After a trial at London's Old Bailey that took place from January 18th to April 21st, 2022, James Watson, at the age of 41, was found guilty of Rikki Neave's murder. On June 24, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years by Mrs. Justice McGowan. The judge considered Watson's age at the time of Rikki's death as a significant factor in determining the sentence. In June 2023, Watson was granted permission to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued before the Court of Appeal that Watson was not able to get a fair trial because too much of the evidence from which the killer's DNA could have been recovered was lost or destroyed in the intervening years. This case could have been solved much earlier if the official police records of 6 reported sexual assaults on children in the Welland estate in the 3-year period before Rikki's murder had been thoroughly investigated. If the reports had been followed up, the allegation on his record of touching a 5-year-old could have been a crucial lead to the police in finding the perpetrator. These failures in the investigation add to the list of the many shortcomings in this case. The verdict was a triumph for Rikki's sisters, who had never thought they would see justice for their beloved brother. With the killer finally caught, the family found a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives while cherishing the memory of the little boy Rikki was back in 1994. Rikki Neave will forever be remembered as a loving and caring brother and a brave and kind-hearted boy. Despite facing challenges at a young age, he showed remarkable courage and love and always protected his sisters. He deserved a life brimming with joy, but tragically, he endured cruelty, neglect, and the ultimate horror of murder. If he had been given the love and affection he deserved, this heart-wrenching tragedy might never have occurred in the first place. The case of Sheila LaBar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila LaBar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBar? Sheila LaBar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long. because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch LaBar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, LaBar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and LaBar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LaBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at LaBar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find LaBar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since LaBar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. LaBar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. In the midst of winter, when families gather to celebrate peace and joy, a sinister shadow loomed over the picturesque town of Dover, Arkansas. It was December 1987, a time meant for festivity and love, but for one family, it became a scene of overwhelming horror. This is the chilling tale of the Christmas killer Ronald Gene Simmons, a man who transformed the season of giving into a time of unspeakable tragedy. But what leads a person to destroy what they once cherished? What darkness lies within the human mind that can turn a father into a monster? From decorated war hero to a man convicted of the worst family massacre in American history, we'll delve into the depths of a mind clouded by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator became fatally blurred. To understand the mind behind the massacre, we must journey back to the origins of Ronald Gene Simmons. His story begins not with violence, but with a seemingly ordinary life, marked by service and family. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His father died of a stroke when Ronald was 3. His mother got married again in less than a year to a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was transferred to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons's early childhood, but it was a life that took a turn towards discipline and commitment when Ronald dropped out of school and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1957, and later the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served with distinction. Over a 22-year career, he received several commendations, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence, up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family, the desperation to conceal his illicit acts, or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure, ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair mini-mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987, because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas, by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas, on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives. One by one. Later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His three other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday visit, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila, her 33-year-old husband, Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mark, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice, and wounded her in the office of Woodmine Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran, to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simmons' life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family, coupled with a need for dominance, may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings. "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here, and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment. Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger, as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions." The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only added to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter Sheila was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," after she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police. On February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance, coupled with deep-seated issues likely stemming from his abusive behavior within the family, set the stage for tragedy. Simmons' military discipline, juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life, created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened, possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they are going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there: isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simmons' story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, "He had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk." Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in 1981 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? Tell me in the comments. Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama. It's also Alabama's fastest-growing metropolitan area and the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a melting pot for cultures with its southern hospitality. This historic college town is the home to Auburn University, one of the most recognized public universities in the nation. Today's story involves the former student of this university, Lori Slesinski. Lori Ann Slesinski was born to parents Casey and Arlene Slesinski on September 21, 1981. Gifted with blue eyes and blonde hair, Lori was always adored by her parents and her big brother Paul. The family was originally from New York State, but later moved south to the rural Alabama farm country near the town of Auburn when Lori was just 13 years old. As a country girl being raised with animals, Lori was an avid animal lover. According to her friends, Lori was absolutely beautiful. She loved spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to all that fun, she was also very studious, and her family tried to support her as much as they could. After finishing high school, Lori enrolled in nearby Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents bought her a mobile home so that she could live off campus in a manicured trailer park that was popular with students. She was living alone with her beloved dog, Peanut, a Yorkshire Terrier. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job in the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsey Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsey in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they had both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsey saying that she had to stop at the store, and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsey grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsey's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsey, along with another co-worker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsey could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog Peanut was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsey felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsay remembered that Laurie had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can, when Lindsay entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Laurie's mother, Arlene, got a call from her workplace regarding Laurie missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her, but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Laurie's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly ajar and her bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Laurie. Her car was also missing. With a closer look, she noticed Laurie's kitchen rugs, a pillow from a couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that Laurie put a rake and shovel in, and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing, while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Laurie's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There was semen discovered on Laurie's bedsheet, and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage on June 10, 2006, showing Laurie stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Laurie, and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Arlene got a phone call from one of Laurie's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Laurie the day she went missing, and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Laurie had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Laurie invited him to spend Christmas with Laurie's family in 2005. Laurie felt bad for him, having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming, despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Laurie would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself, yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Laurie's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Laurie was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Laurie's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Laurie grew marijuana together. According to him, Laurie might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Laurie could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Laurie's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Laurie dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took notice several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Laurie last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Laurie, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Laurie's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Laurie had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Laurie told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told her friends about his letter and Laurie's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Laurie was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. To gather more evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis's stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Elvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told him that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotionless 12-year-old Ennis told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave the school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, he moved to Auburn, where he then met Lois Slesinski. After Lois' disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis's past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lois' murder without Lois' body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Lois' case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with them, which he claimed were a gift from Laurie. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis's dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Laurie's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Laurie's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved, while Laurie's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then, in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started re-investigating Laurie's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J.W. Barnes. Laurie's case was their first project, and they began revisiting the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing, and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis's past, and his gut told him that Ennis had done something similar to Laurie, but he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. he discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lori's disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis's DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was happily engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lori Slesinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by a task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis's fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, his trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis's involvement in the crime, including the cigarette butt in Lori's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lori Slesinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when 2 more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just 1 day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas tank. Jeremy rejected his request.
What did he say? All of the A's and gas, and it was a way that I could run in and get nothing gas.
Later, after police found Lori's scorched car in a gas can, it matched the description of a gas can that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience she had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Arlene Slesinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this tragic case. Do you think Rick Ennis will ever give up the location of Lori's remains? If you like our content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Monday, September 14, 2015, was remembered by 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan as the best day of his life. The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend. A traditional morning mass with his girlfriend's family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday morning, next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman before whom the whole world is open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, monetary assets, and made plans how he would manage the family business alone, and certainly do it better than his father, who brought the company to bankruptcy. It would seem that what could go wrong? Already on October 1, 2015, Nolan Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California, by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolan was incarcerated at the Juvenile Treatment Center, JTC, in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student. "As far as I know, he was a good kid," Bonita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview. "He always cared about school, he seemed very kind, he was very nice. I'm even surprised he was arrested." But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Let's break down this horrific case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to apply for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Cheerful, sociable, and cheerful blonde immediately attracted the attention of the owner of the company. The interest was mutual. Molly fell in love, started a romance that turned into a serious relationship, and her move to Adam. Molly dreamed of a real, loving, friendly family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson. Soon she became pregnant. Gavin was born. People who knew the Buchanans claimed that they were a fairly close-knit family of 4. The head of the family, who owned a construction company, earned enough to ensure a comfortable life, and the family even purchased vacation property in El Dorado County, California. A small cabin sat on 19 acres in Greenwood, a rustic cabin with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, took an active role in remodeling the house, and the family began to visit there often. On September 13, 2015 at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado County, on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property. A cabin located on the property was still smoldering, but had burned to the ground. The fire department personnel observed charred remains in the ashes. The scene of the fire was not touched, and at 11 a.m. firefighters called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. No one had yet realized what was at the scene. Firefighters were almost certain that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped in the house. The arriving coroner was faced with a daunting task. The remains of the house were still smoldering, and there was no way to examine the inside of the house. They had to wait for the flames to finally die down and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner examined the house, he smelled the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later discovered a human skull and a burned chest. It appeared that the tragedy had claimed someone's life. The officer requested backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived and conducted a thorough examination of the scene. The conclusion was obvious. The small, secluded and remote cabin was not the primary residence of its owners. Rather, it was most likely a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. The man in question lived 160 miles from the scene of the accident, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California. This information confirmed the assumption of the police, who decided that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the hustle and bustle of the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else. The name of the owner of the company gave the detectives their first clue, with which they began their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address, and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. At a knock on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out. He greeted the uniformed officers with surprise and asked what brought them to him. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father Adam had gone away for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient reason to believe the remains in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information received and the discovery of the remains, believed to be those of 2 people, by the evening of September 13th, was enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire. The next day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to Nolan's home to talk to him more thoroughly and try to figure out whose lives the fire had claimed. Officers were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They said that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, does his own home repairs and therefore travels there very often. The parents were very concerned as they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until now. From the story, the officers learned that the house is connected to generators, but at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity. There were, however, gas cylinders inside. This gave 2 theories. The fire could have been either accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire scene had cooled down and investigators were finally able to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Detective James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that changed the direction of the case. Police found a piece of skull with a bullet hole. At that point, we all realized that there was actually a homicide. This was not an accidental fire, reported the sheriff. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. In the first set of remains, the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole, judging by its size, belonged to a child. The version of fatal accident dropped by itself. The version of murder came to the forefront. No one now doubted that the fire was a means of destroying the traces of the crime. It remained to find out under what circumstances the crime had taken place. Was it a burglary that had gone wrong? Or had the family taken their lives deliberately? But then by whom and why? Or could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction, a company where Adam Buchanan was president and chief operating officer, and someone harbored a grudge against him due to a working relationship? Initially, investigators focused specifically on the latter theory. They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of the crime. Once those lines of inquiry stalled, officers turned their attention to problems in Molly and Adam's marriage. There proved to be plenty of them. Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship began to deteriorate, and at the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for quite some time. A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was rude not only to Molly, but also to the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, admitted to investigators, "There were times when I was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments." Molly did not sever her relationship with Adam, but would periodically take her son and leave to go to her parents' house and return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot, and when he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them must necessarily be the instrument of crime, which, however, was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon may have been damaged in the fire and may not have looked as obvious as expected. Over the course of 5 days, forensic team members took turns removing ashes from the home. The search was conducted with surgical thoroughness, but did not yield the expected result. No weapons were found in the house. By this time came the data of forensic examination. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the version that someone took their own life. The lack of firearms meant that someone else was in the house. A 4th person who shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old son of the deceased. Nolan told officers that the family drove away in an old Dodge truck, According to the Sun, his father decided to use the company vehicle rather than his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks that he was going to decorate the area near his country cabin. It was this truck that police found near the burned structure. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, the young man, as in the first interview, said that he had a duty to look after the house and garden during the absence of his father and stepmother. Nolan also said that they had a neighbor growing forbidden grass on the edge of the Buchanan property, which caused his father to have frequent arguments with this neighbor, demanding that he stop planting the grass and threatening to go to the police. Talking about the family business, Nolan told of the company's financial difficulties. Things were not going well. The company was undergoing downsizing and the number of employees was down to 5. From what his father said, the debts associated with the business were increasing rapidly. So now the investigation had a lot of useful information, and the detectives had a suspect, a neighbor, especially since in that area, violent crime was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs. Detectives felt that the threat of going to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. The problem was, no one had any idea which neighbor they were talking about. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing all the homeowners in a row. The tactic was successful. They found a man who confirmed the story of a quarrel with Adam over growing a forbidden crop. But according to him, after a sharp conversation, the conflict was over. The neighbor had an alibi, and another version turned out to be untenable. What remained to be dealt with was the financial crisis that had hit the family's business. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees. Nolan's words were true. The company was in a sorry state. It was threatened with bankruptcy, as the amount of debts exceeded $30,000. Because of this, some employees were fired. It turned out that some of the former employees were extremely dissatisfied with the reduction and therefore could be involved in the crime. And that's where investigators got lucky. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found under one of the bushes. A .22 caliber rifle was lying nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption. The perpetrator had massacred the Buchanan family with the found rifle and, covering his tracks, had taken their documents from the crime scene. The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared to be a Bonita resident. The proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan construction strengthened the theory that the boss was massacred by one of the disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, requesting a warrant to inspect the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By happy coincidence, the lens of the camera was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators re-interviewed Nolan, trying to keep him safe while getting as many details as possible. Nolan again recounted his weekend, where he had been, and who he had seen. Only this time they asked him what movie they had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for the shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. The unsuspecting Nolan answered, with his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search Buchanan's home in Bonita, search the vehicles, and check financial records. The Ford automobile was still parked in the driveway. It was closely inspected, and they noticed reddish soil sticking to the wheels, similar to that in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they would not have been as obvious. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Detectives tracked the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at fast food chain Taco Bell on his way to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not go with his parents, and had the credit card in his possession. Detectives went to the diner and checked the security cameras. They saw exactly what they expected: a white Ford instead of a truck. When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that included not 3 but 4 drinks. Evidence collected at the scene of the fire similarly pointed to 4 drink cups. So Nolan was in the car? The next credit card transaction took place on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes away from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously told detectives about the bar. They said their son and daughter-in-law liked to drop in there after renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded the time the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track the couple's route. A Ford F-150 headed toward the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 a.m. drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, the camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle, and in the second, only Nolan. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to pay at 3 of Bonita's establishments: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to investigators that Buchanan had only one bank card. The facts contradicted Nolan's stories. By this time, forensic results had come back. Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He attempted to distort the story and claimed that it was his father who shot the family, after which he pointed a rifle at him, and he, defending himself, took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan insisted it was self-defense, attributing the fire and subsequent lie to a state of panic and extreme fright. That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire to make it look like nothing had happened there. The defense continually focused the jury's attention on Adam's abuse of his own son and other family members. The medical examiner questioned the verdict because the bullet wound mark on a piece of Gavin's skull was consistent with a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed that his and his brother's beds were next to each other, and they were simultaneously awakened by the noise and screaming. It was at the moment of awakening that Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at him, and Nolan miraculously managed to push the attacker away. Under this scenario, the shot would have been fired at about a 45-degree angle, which was inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution came to believe that Nolan shot his brother when they were alone in the house while their parents spent time at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. Judging by where the bodies were found, Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. Then he went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, creating an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Judge Kingsbury, in announcing the sentence, reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolan faced. On the testimony that Nolan massacred his brother because he didn't want him to go through the same horror or be forced to live with what his father had already managed to do to him. But as she did, she also listed facts about the premeditation of the crime and subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolan had voiced to family members. The judge cited a failure to follow rules and deviant behavior noted by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where Nolan went after his arrest. "Everyone has the opportunity to change," Judge Kingsbury told Nolan. "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under the Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings. It's up to you whether you take that chance or not." Nolan continues to insist he is innocent. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay a huge compensation to the victims. The amount of the payout is unknown at this time. No story is more sorrowful in the world than the tale of Romeo and Juliet, concludes the Duke in the most famous story about two lovers. Yet in Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet end their lives by their own choice, while in our story, the young lover solves the problem differently. The creation of the Borden family began in Missouri. Michael and Catherine met in school. They were classmates. Michael was captivated by his blonde, radiant, and responsive classmate. In the upper grades, he tried various ways to get her attention. He helped with homework and invited her out for walks. This way, they became best friends and spent a lot of time together, learning lessons and sharing secrets with each other. Gradually, their friendship turned into something more, and they realized they were in love with each other. Michael invited Catherine on a date where he first declared his love. After some time, the young people got married. The wedding was a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where Michael and Catherine promised to love each other in all life circumstances. After 10 years of marriage, the family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Lititz was founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756, and it was inhabited by descendants of Moravian communities. The primary population of the town were faithful families who sought refuge in their oasis from the horrors of modern life. Life in the town was quiet and peaceful. Many families belonged to the Christian Amish community and led a lifestyle befitting a believer. Their life was simple, with people trying to do without many modern technologies. The Borden family was deeply devout, so the choice of Lititz was no accident. This suburb seemed perfectly suited for the birth and upbringing of children. Life flowed so calmly that a new day was just like the last. This was precisely what the Bordens were looking for: complete family solitude and creation in solitude with God. Michael served in the local church community and taught lessons in Sunday school. Catherine primarily managed the household and assisted her husband in his work. In the community, Michael worked more for spiritual wealth. For everyday worldly needs, he had to work as a manager at a printing company. In the following years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families living in Lititz were large, with some having more than 5 children. Hoping to shield their children from the hardships and dangers of the larger world, families regularly attended church, while local teenagers joined youth groups and were homeschooled. Interactions between families were limited to joint religious societies and celebrations. The family idol created by Michael Borden lasted for many years, with children being raised in faith and discipline. In the early 2000s, the eldest sons, having reached adulthood, went to university and moved to another city to study. This left 3 children at home who continued their homeschooling to the delight of their parents. Neighbors and the couple's few friends spoke highly of the children's upbringing and their diverse interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were exemplary, kind, and responsive. But it wasn't always this way. As the eldest daughter, Kara, entered her teenage years, it turned the family's traditional ways upside down. Despite her father's prohibitions, she began playing in the local soccer team, sneaking out to discos, and thoughtlessly doing everything she had been forbidden to do before. The young beauty's behavior deeply shook her father. Many hours of talks and instructions did not resonate in Kara's heart. Reasons for arguments appeared, which time and again led to the young rebel's escape. The girl openly showed interest in young men and sought relationships. Thus, in 2005, 18-year-old David and 14-year-old Kara met in a support group for students involved in homeschooling issues. The young people, with their passionate hearts attracted to all things forbidden, quickly established warm, friendly relations. Secretly from their parents, they agreed and created social media profiles, where they began actively exchanging messages. The correspondence was lengthy and very emotional. They exchanged well-encoded messages to keep their communication secret from everyone as long as possible. After a while, exchanging letters was not enough, and they began secretly meeting. At first, these were harmless walks in quiet, secluded places around the city. Then their friendly relationship evolved into a romantic one. They ran away together at night to discos and spent time together until morning. David was older and had already experienced first love and disappointment. Kara was so young that her new, bright feelings could hardly be contained. She didn't just walk, she seemed to fly, and a happy smile never left her beautiful face. Meeting David brought back the obedient Kara to her parents. Her father was overjoyed, believing that the teenage challenges were a thing of the past. But Michael was mistaken. Only the fear of being discovered by her parents quelled the girl's inner fire as she hid her love from them. This deeply saddened Kara. She knew what their reaction to such early relationships would be, as she had been instilled with entirely different concepts of possible love between a man and a woman from childhood, trying to protect her from such knowledge for as long as possible. Fearing their parents' negative reaction, the young couple carefully guarded their secret. But sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, unable to hold back, Kara shared her secret with her sister. She showed her a photo of David, shared how their relationship began, and that they were so in love and determined to be together against all odds that they were ready to run away. Her sister, fearful for Kara, told their mother about the planned elopement. Thus, the secret of the young lovers was revealed. One early morning, the young woman climbed through the window into the house and quietly, like a mouse, went up to her room. Elated, Kara was returning from another date with her David. She entered her room and froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed. Everything became clear without words. After breakfast, a conversation took place in which her parents forbade her any relationship with the young man. They were shocked, having shielded their children from violence, controlled substances, and other negative stories, that such misfortune had befallen them. Kara's father was so outraged and disappointed that he forbade her from leaving her room. That night, Kara Borden spent in David's house. At 5:30 a.m., the young lover dropped her off near her house. They agreed that as soon as Kara safely returned to her room, she would send him a text message. However, the awaited message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara informed him that she was caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived at the appointed time. The conversation began with the father expressing deep indignation and forbidding the young man from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents' morals and stance were very conservative. They were categorically against relationships at their daughter's young age. Words of love did not touch the father's heart. He warned the young man that if he saw him with Kara again, he would be compelled to report him to the police for involvement with a minor. The lengthy, emotional conversation ended on a high note. Kara was locked in her room again, and David left with nothing. The young man got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or maybe out of hurt that he was not taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled greatly through the long days apart. They couldn't withstand the test of separation, so they devised a plan, deceive everyone by accepting Kara's father's conditions, pretend to break up, but continue their secret love. And they convincingly played the part of former lovers. In public places or at church, they didn't even greet each other. Kara's parents were appeased, convinced they had protected their daughter from a youthful mistake. David missed her terribly. In the evenings, he read Shakespeare, imagining openly serenading his beloved like Romeo. But in the Capulet and Montague tragedy, the lovers could not reconcile their families and receive their blessing. David Ludwig took decisive action. He called Kara's home asking for a meeting with her father. The young man was very serious and asked his beloved to talk about their upcoming marriage. On November 13, 2005, David Ludwig arrived at the Borden residence for a talk with Michael, the father of his beloved Kara. He announced his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their plans to marry. Michael's response was dismissive. That will never happen." Anticipating such a response and coming prepared, David, fueled by rage, drew a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was walking towards the front door. Then, David sought out Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting on a chair. David then searched for Kara in the house, calling out for her, but he couldn't find her. Afterwards, he got into his car and started to drive away when he saw Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car and told David she wanted to go as far away as possible, get married, and start a new life. The young couple fled the city in the boy's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with a young man who had just shown such brutality? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were considered good kids. How did they turn into criminals? Kara Borden was reported missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found deceased. After reviewing surveillance footage, the police followed the trail of the teenagers. The footage also proved that Kara had not resisted but willingly accompanied David. Charges of abducting Kara were dropped against David Ludwig. Alerts were issued across the east as Pennsylvania and Indiana police investigated sightings of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. Authorities received a tip on Monday morning about a vehicle matching that description parked near a truck stop outside of Fort Wayne. Police headed to the area, but the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrols spotted the car around noon on I-70 in Belleville. David Ludwig merged onto the interstate, leading them on a 5-mile chase at speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a 2-lane highway. State Trooper David Cox, who was involved in the pursuit, described Ludwig as extremely reckless and dangerous at that moment, causing multiple accidents like in an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a top national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had ended the lives of his girlfriend's parents and took her with him. It turned out the lovers planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney, commenting on the investigation, stated that the earlier abduction charge against the teenager would be dropped, but the charges for the demise of Michael and Catherine Borden would remain. Ludwig and Kara Beth fled together after the incident and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. Kara Beth was not charged with any crime. David Ludwig was detained without bail on charges of ending lives and abduction. Kara Borden was taken into the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the demise of the Bordens following a prolonged dispute. 14-year-old Kara Borden faced no charges. On November 16, David Ludwig was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. The failed Romeo confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm. "It was a deliberate act. I intended to shoot them if they got in our way, and I did." During the search of the young man's vehicle upon his arrest, no weapons were found. But when police visited Ludwig's home, they discovered 54 firearms. This arsenal belonged to Ludwig's father, a hunter who taught his son how to handle weapons. An 18-minute video from a laptop in his home showed Ludwig discussing plans for an armed invasion of another family's home, showing him bringing weapons into the house, though court documents state they abandoned this plan due to too many cars present. The police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, yet Ludwig filed court documents claiming surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. Ludwig did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of the young individual responsible for ending 2 adult lives in front of their children was brief, as detailed in court documents. Kara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. According to court documents, Caitlin saw Ludwig shoot her father, then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot. presumably the one that took her mother's life. Ludwig then ran through the house calling for Kara, she told investigators. The couple's 9-year-old son ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David Ludwig entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. Thus, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years, and was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by a legal counsel. In written statements published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara Borden left with Ludwig of her own free will. Ludwig's lawyer reportedly stated that Kara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings show that Borden had ample opportunity to escape. Kara admitted that she ran after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Borden simply wished to marry her beloved, David Ludwig. Kara Beth has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the District Attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions, alongside Ludwig's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind, contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Kara Beth, amidst her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. The Borden family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Mike and Katie are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Borden family and Ludwig's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. Friends and neighbors recalled Kara Borden as a joyful and sociable young girl, known for her babysitting in the neighborhood and her passion for soccer. Kevin Eschleman, executive pastor at Ephrata Community Church, noted her regular participation in youth group activities. However, underlying tensions between Kara and her parents were noted by Zimmerman, highlighting concerns over Kara's interest in boys. Samuel P. Lohr, a friend of Ludwig, disclosed to authorities their secret intimate relationship, marked by flirtatious electronic communications and inappropriate image exchanges, according to legal documents. Zimmerman mentioned a significant decision by Kara's parents to disconnect her internet service in response to her relationship with David, indicating their disapproval. The peaceful town was left in shock by the grim events that unfolded, resonating beyond the local community to wider circles, especially those involved in homeschooling. Friends of the family struggled to comprehend how such sheltered children could commit acts of grave severity. Officially, they weren't considered a couple due to parental disapproval of their relationship, shared Stephanie Mammon, a 16-year-old neighbor of the Borden family. This incident underscores the dilemma where David Ludwig, faced with opposition, chose violence as a solution to his problems. David G. Ludwig's appeal for release was ultimately denied by the state appellate court, as announced by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office. Following his sentencing on June 20th, Ludwig underwent various assessments at Camp Hill before being moved to a state prison in Indiana County to start serving his life sentence for the taking the life of his girlfriend's parents. David Ludwig, at 19, was transferred on August 3rd to the State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove, announced by Susan Norton, spokesperson for the State Department of Corrections. The state chose the Indiana State Prison for Ludwig because of its youthful offender program. Designed for inmates aged 15 to 20, the program aims to teach self-responsibility, discipline, respect for others, and self-worth. According to the Department of Corrections, Pine Grove opened in 2000 houses some of the state's most challenging young offenders in a therapeutic community setting. Inmates at Pine Grove start their day at 6:10 a.m. with a roll call, followed by a 6:30 a.m. workout session including squats, push-ups, and jogging in place. They return to their cells at 7:15 a.m. to get ready for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., with lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 4:20 p.m. The bulk of the day is filled with 4 hours of educational classes, ranging from culinary arts, business, computer drafting, heating and cooling system installation, to building maintenance, and 4 hours of personal life management skills training. Inmates also participate in the 90-day military-style leadership development program fostering honor, discipline, honesty, and respect. Transitioning from the county jail, where Ludwig earned his high school diploma, to the state correctional facility was a challenge for the young man, stated Merrill M. Spann, one of Ludwig's attorneys. He will also be amongst young people from the general population and will be able to have visitors. The change was difficult because the county jail was smaller, and he had gotten used to the environment, Spann said. The cost of housing an inmate at Pine Grove, which employs about 430 people, is approximately $120 a day. Mr. Ludwig will be assigned jobs such as janitorial work or food service, and he will engage in daily recreational and educational activities, Norton stated. Inmates can earn between 18 to 42 cents an hour working as carpenters, plumbers, cooks, and laborers. The money earned can be used to purchase clothing, footwear, food, and personal items at the prison commissary. Most of the 250 inmates at Pine Grove stay until they turn 22, after which they are transferred to adult prisons to serve the remainder of their sentences. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 consecutive life sentences for shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in their home in November 2005, after they told him he could no longer see their 14-year-old daughter, Kara Borden. In his latest petition, Ludwig referred to alleged issues, including being treated as a juvenile offender serving a life sentence. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which found life imprisonment for juvenile offenders to be unconstitutional. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently denied the request, agreeing with Lancaster County Judge David Ashworth, who previously deemed the challenge untimely and unfounded, according to the county prosecutor's office. Ashworth stated that Ludwig does not deserve the same consideration as minors because he was 18 and a half at the time of the tragedies. David Ludwig is currently incarcerated in Luzerne County. Kara Beth Borden, the 14-year-old girlfriend of 18-year-old David Ludwig, who is accused of ending the lives of the Borden parents and fleeing with her to Indiana, has reunited with her family in Pennsylvania. However, as CBS News correspondent Sharon Alfonsi reports, it remains unclear what role Kara Borden may have played in the incident. According to Alfonsi, the police now view Borden as a victim. She has not been arrested, which leaves open the possibility that she played a significant role in the unfolding events. Given her age of 14, there's also speculation about potential charges against Ludwig for involvement with a minor. Warwick Police Chief Richard F. Garipoli Jr. told CBS News, "Kara is upset, she's crying, she's 14 years old and it seems we forget that. She's devastated. This has completely changed the fabric of our community," a Borden neighbor involved in the memorial service told CBS News. "They were wonderful people and we'll miss them terribly." "It's complete madness, absolute madness," said the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania coroner G. Gary Kirchner. "This isn't a Romeo and Juliet deal. It's much worse." Thus, a decision made in a moment of fury and desperation took 3 lives. Why do we say 3 when there are 2 victims? Having received 2 life sentences, 18-year-old David Ludwig will live out his days in prison, never again to make a choice independently and never to be free again. But is that truly living? The community long remembered this terrible story and couldn't understand how such positive children could so casually commit such evil. Unfortunately, homeschooling didn't prevent this horrific tragedy. Growing up and being educated in a Christian environment didn't stop the cruel act. Perhaps the parents, trusting in God and faith, missed something crucial in raising their children or failed to convey the important lessons of Christian faith effectively. Maybe they weren't fulfilling their parental duties adequately, not having heartfelt conversations with their children, or trusting each other enough to prevent their daughter's secret escapes and stop the quest for new experiences. Perhaps it would have been better to allow the children to live without mentioning the Almighty, still sharing with their children the life they themselves had lived at a young age, where there weren't so many restrictions and deprivations. Deciding for the children, parents eventually faced disappointment from the decisions made later on. We can only speculate what might have prevented this tragedy. From all we've learned, one thing is clear: violence always leads to more violence. When we're taught to live with violence, we become good as long as we're coerced and accepted as part of life. The more we practice, the more we endure, and then use violence to solve our problems. Unfortunately, much of this acceptance of violence comes from Christian homes, but such violence is entirely against Christian teaching. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. Brett's parents tried to teach him through their own actions. His father held a prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had various hobbies like sports, yoga, and psychology. Likewise, Susan was very hardworking. Their entire household rested on her shoulders. She not only devoted time to her husband and children, but also managed the huge house in Toronto's prestigious area without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always aimed to be better than his siblings, so he advertised painting services in a local newspaper for Toronto residents' houses and fences. Initially, things went well. He made his first earnings, and Susan was proud of him, often using him as an example for others. However, making money as a part-time job is one thing. Dropping out of university to spend all your time inhaling paint fumes without proper education is another matter altogether. After some time in university, Brett decided to drop out. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland, the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he did know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall, since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet: a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching some thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, Brett saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes, purchased second-hand or even retrieved from trash, and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store, since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber, but despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett's hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end, but then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, Brett faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family, but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, Brett was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the bank robber, he was simply a painter, burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's proposal to Kristen meant the world to her, signaling his serious intentions. Despite this, he decided to go the extra mile and purchased a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, with all of Kristen's decisions, nodding in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he's resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. Brett agreed to rent an expensive restaurant, requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation: a prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, Brett confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance. Unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself, a shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting in the at targets. He taught Brett how to. Yes, was good at target shooting, though it was unlikely his late father thought his son would that skill in such manner. Brett bought crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day. But Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get a crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind, which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, He took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, 1 for each murder, with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters, but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Blackburn family. On the morning of November 10th, 2015, a car was parked outside a home on Sunnyfield Court. Davy Blackburn had returned from his daily gym workout. Just as he was about to step out of his car, a phone call delayed him for a few minutes. After concluding the call, Davy leisurely exited his vehicle and entered his house. Upon opening the door, he froze. His gym bag slipped from his hands. His wife lay on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Confused and deeply shocked, he rushed to her side for an examination, felt for a pulse, and immediately dialed emergency services. The young woman was still alive, though the living room was in disarray, items scattered everywhere, and her purse emptied. Upstairs, their small child was crying. Emergency services arrived within 8 minutes. Police officers and investigators filled the house right after it got cordoned off. Amanda Blackburn was urgently transported to the hospital. Now let's pivot back to understand more about Amanda's background, so we don't miss vital details of this tragic story. Amanda Grace Buers was born on July 31st, 1987, in Muskegon, Michigan. She went to school in Indianapolis, Indiana, until her family moved to Elkhart in 1995. There she graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, and later earned an associate degree from Pensacola Christian College in Florida by 2008. Amanda grew up in a deeply religious family, where Christianity and God's teachings were central tenets of their lives. Her father served as the lead pastor at First Baptist Church in Elkhart. Thus, church sermons and Psalter were ingrained in her from childhood. She knew them by heart and honored them wholly. While other children raced toward adulthood's temptations like parties and first loves, Amanda's passion lay in her faith and her dream of serving Jesus faithfully. Amanda, a blonde-haired, slim girl with a welcoming smile and genuine intentions. Not just beautiful on the outside, Amanda's thoughts and heart were pure. In every action, she displayed love for her neighbor. As a teenager, she took a vow of chastity, promising not to even kiss a man until marriage, and she always kept her word. Amanda's heart raced when she met Davy Blackburn, her true love. A native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Davy studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University and came from a devout Christian family. The two met on a blind date at a Hawk Nelson concert organized by Amanda's sister and Davy's best friend. At the time, they attended different colleges, but spent every vacation together. Their relationship was purely platonic and free from earthly desires. They enjoyed walks together and shared intimate thoughts and favorite excerpts from church books. Their bond grew stronger as they found joy in simple things and joked sincerely with each other. Once before returning to school, they had a playful milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. Davy teasingly called her Milk Girl, realizing then that she was the one he wanted to marry. The couple maintained a long-distance relationship for quite some time, constantly messaging via messengers, calling each other and chatting for hours. They spent every vacation together. Their respect for the seriousness of their relationship led them to see a psychologist to learn how to communicate properly. On August 1st, 2008, Amanda and Davy Blackburn were married. After the wedding, Davy told friends that from the moment he kissed Amanda, he knew there was a special bond between them, a part of God's plan. For the first 4 years after their marriage, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina, where Davy served as an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble. But the young man wanted more, and he suggested to Amanda that she move to Indianapolis to organize a new church for youth. Amanda was reluctant to leave her family and part with her loved ones. For a time, she struggled with the need to leave South Carolina. Eventually, she relented after her husband told her that God must have big things in store for them. In 2012, the Blackburns moved from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant an independent, high-profile church on the city's north side. The religious organization started by the young family focused on young people, as made clear in the weekly videos they posted on their website, which discussed relationship advice, conflict resolution, and biblical perspectives on intimate relationships. By 2014, the family had welcomed their firstborn child, Weston Blackburn. They were perfectly happy with their comfortable home on a quiet street and their favorite roles within the church. This church was regularly attended by many young people who listened to and believed in their sermons. The family lived in perfect harmony and understanding. However, everything changed on November 10, 2015. Ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence in the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court around 8 a.m. The pregnant young woman was rushed to the hospital where she was hooked up to a ventilator and underwent several resuscitative. Sadly, Amanda died the next day, along with her unborn baby. As it turned out, the family had been expecting a baby girl who was named Evie Grace at her burial. Her death sparked significant sympathy and prayers on social media over an extended period of time, as friends, family members, and strangers mourned Amanda with public posts. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared dead, Davy released an official statement saying that Amanda made it her life's calling to love and serve everyone. She dedicated her life to knowing Jesus as her personal savior, and through passing and legacy, countless others will come to a saving faith in Christ. I firmly believe that God remains good, turning our tragedy into triumph, and that indeed the best is yet to come, Dave wrote. The murder of the pregnant woman was not only a devastating blow to the entire Orthodox family, but also a profound shock to the entire state. People demanded that those responsible for Amanda and her unborn child's death be brought to justice. In his first interview, Davy Blackburn recounted finding his wife Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor. She was partially unclothed, with her underwear lying nearby and herself lying face down in a pool of blood. The pastor informed investigators that he had left the house around 6 a.m. to go to the fitness center for a workout. When he departed, he left the door unlocked. He mentioned this habit during his statement, saying, "You always do that too, don't you? You leave and don't lock the door." While it's hard to say whether securing the door would have prevented this tragedy entirely, it's evident that it made entry much easier for the criminals involved. Unfortunately, Amanda did not have precious time to contact emergency services, resulting in an attack that left her with 3 gunshot wounds, one of them being fatal. No arrests were made in the days immediately following this heinous crime. However, police quickly determined that Davy Blackburn was not involved in this horrific incident. Trial transcripts reveal additional details from Davy Blackburn's testimony, alongside accounts from witnesses such as Scott Floyd, an emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department, who arrived at their home following Davy's 911 call. According to Scott Floyd's testimony, upon arrival, they found Davy Blackburn outside at the end of the driveway with blood on his hands, but maintaining a very calm demeanor. Scott Floyd stated that Blackburn appeared not to fully comprehend what had transpired with Amanda when they reached him at their residence. Davey claimed he came home from the gym at about 7:30 a.m. and continued his phone call with his friend Kenneth Wagner in the driveway. He occasionally got out, strolled down the driveway, and peeked through the front door window to see if baby Weston was awake. He said he finished his call, entered his home at 8:10 a.m., and found Amanda lying face down on the floor. He thought she was sick or unconscious. He called emergency services at 8:22 a.m. It took him 12 minutes to make that call. In an emergency situation, 12 minutes is quite a long time. He repeatedly said he thought something had gone wrong with the pregnancy and maybe she'd gotten dizzy and fallen. Did he not notice after 12 minutes that there was brain matter about 5 feet away from her body? Emergency room Dr. Scott Floyd testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, leading him to believe that the gunshot had occurred a couple of hours earlier, but those transcripts were not made public. Davey was asked if he had called anyone else after dialing 911. He said he called his father next. Defense attorneys did not cross-examine Davey Blackburn. Authorities corroborated his story with surveillance footage from the gym. Thus, he was not among the suspects. An autopsy conducted on November 12th showed Amanda suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had a gunshot wound to her lower left arm that went through her biceps, and another one that entered and exited her upper back. Multiple scratches were found on her left cheek, along with a split lip and a knocked-out lower tooth. These injuries indicated a possible struggle between Amanda and her attacker. A thorough investigation was launched. CCTV footage from nearby streets was examined. Neighbors and family acquaintances were interviewed as well. One neighbor reported hearing gunshots about 35 minutes after Davey left the house. Another neighbor, Reginald Townsell, mentioned their street wasn't known for incidents like this, and expressed shock by stating that the Blackburns didn't deserve this tragedy. Everyone thought highly of the Blackburn family. They were seen as wonderful and loving people by their community. Based on Amanda's injuries and the missing bank cards as well as MacBook bag, robbery seemed to be an initial theory during this investigation. On the morning of November 10th, 2015, several emergency calls were made reporting home invasions, various residences near Blackburn's home. Around 5:20 a.m., one woman reported waking up to find her cell, laptop, purse, and keys missing from her apartment. Her car was also gone from the parking. The sliding glass door to her apartment was. 3 hours later, another woman reported a burglary. Someone had broken through the patio screen and entered the house. According to police reports, 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink women's sweater, a remote control, a bag of oranges, and bedding were missing from the residence. Just 5 minutes after that second call, another individual from Sunnyfield Court contacted emergency services. This time, it was Davey Blackburn. Lieutenant Richard of the Indianapolis Police Department stated that police were investigating potential connections between this homicide and the other burglaries in the same neighborhood that morning. The police have not disclosed details about the ongoing investigation to maintain its integrity. However, after obtaining images of possible suspects from one of the burglarized homes, they released these images to the public for assistance in identifying and helping with the investigation. Davey Blackburn expressed confidence that the police department was doing everything within their power to apprehend his wife's perpetrator. Investigators assured him that they had unprecedented support to continue their investigation and were optimistic that promising leads would soon help identify those responsible. Key clues instrumental in tracking down 3 suspects included a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. The receipt and sweater were discovered in a stolen Chrysler Sebring used during the robberies. Authorities recovered this vehicle on November 11th near Blackburn's home. The debit card listed on the receipt matched Amanda Blackburn's stolen card. Investigators obtained a warrant to examine ATM camera footage and discovered video showing the driver concealing his face with a stolen pink sweater. Police relied on DNA testing, surveillance footage, and witnesses' testimonies to identify those responsible for these crimes. The results from the DNA testing of the sweater confirmed that J.N. Watson was one of the suspects. Watson's identification marked the first significant breakthrough in the case, as indicated in the affidavit. Cell phone records were obtained because Watson's number was already in the database due to his parole for a prior burglary. Subsequently, Diana Gordon's cell phone records were also retrieved. These records demonstrated that both Watson's and Gordon's cell phones were present in the vicinity when the crime occurred. The phone records further disclosed that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank, where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. Larry Taylor emerged as a critical piece of information when police examined surveillance footage from the area. This footage enabled them to identify Taylor's phone number and trace his address. In the subsequent days, reports surfaced indicating that a firearm had been located near the Blackburn residence. According to police, an individual delivered this gun to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming they had found it outside the couple's home. Crime lab technicians analyzed the weapon over 2 weeks of investigation and detective work. Police eventually charged 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old J.N. Watson with Amanda Blackburn's murder. Another individual, 24-year-old Diana Gordon, who was suspected of burglary, was arrested for a parole violation and not charged with a felony. He did not enter Blackburn's home during the incident. The crime lab confirmed that a gun found near Amanda Blackburn's home was indeed used in committing the crime. All 3 suspects were taken into custody. During questioning, Larry Taylor admitted to shooting Amanda twice, explaining he acted out of fear she might scratch him after she jumped on him. After she fell over, he leaned down and shot her in the back of her head, subsequently watching her bleed to death. The criminal trio intended to rob the Blackburn house for money. They chose their target upon noticing that Amanda's husband had left their front door unlocked when he went to the gym. Inside, they confronted Amanda to prevent her from interfering. During this confrontation, Taylor struck her with a gun. Watson and Gordon saw the woman and decided it was time to leave. They already had the stolen bank cards, so they went searching for an ATM. After failing to withdraw $500 from one, they successfully obtained $1,400 from another. This is when CCTV captured them. They then headed back to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor. In their absence, a struggle took place inside. Amanda, regaining consciousness after being struck, lunged at the intruder. He tackled her in response. Following this, Taylor placed the stolen debit cards in the accomplice's car, who was at an ATM during the crime. Upon their return, he confessed to shooting Amanda, according to court records. The Blackburn home was their 3rd target on November 10th. Earlier, in their first break-in, they stole a laptop, wallet, and car while the resident slept. Inside that home, they noticed a recording camera, but moved on regardless. Next, they broke into another house through a patio window and stole 4 televisions, a laptop, jewelry, a bag of oranges, and a pink sweater that later helped police identify them. Court documents detailed this evidence collected against the suspects. The crucial piece was Watson's DNA, found on the pink sweater used to cover his face from surveillance as he tried withdrawing cash with Amanda Blackburn's bank card. Watson and Gordon cooperated with authorities in return for reduced sentences. Larry Taylor waived his right to remain silent and admitted being near the burglary scene, but claimed confusion about his activities. Formal charges were brought by the county prosecutor. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including felony murder, after knowingly killing Amanda Blackburn. Jaylen Watson is charged with felony along with multiple counts of burglary and theft. Diana Gordon, already in custody for parole violation, also faces burglary charges. Additionally, there was a 4th person aware of these crimes, but not actively participating in them. He was questioned and released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit worked with the gang unit and federal marshals to arrest Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height praised the cooperation that led to the arrest. The detectives worked tirelessly all day, without sleep to solve the murders in the city. With assistance from Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served. Because the victim was pregnant, prosecutors said they might consider filing additional charges related to the fetus. Even though the woman's underwear had been removed and her shirt pulled up, they stated there was no evidence to support rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial took place in December 2021, but it ended abruptly when it was discovered that a juror had shared information about the case with other jurors. This disclosure interrupted the trial, leading to a mistrial being declared. The final trial took place in October 2022. Jury selection was more thorough this time. Over 100 individuals were considered as potential jurors, each having to fill out a 16-page questionnaire for attorneys to evaluate if a fair verdict could be reached. Larry Joe Taylor received an 86-year sentence at the Indiana State Correctional Institution for Amanda Blackburn's murder and for additional charges related to a home burglary. Diane O'Gordon and Jalen Watson agreed to plea deals and testified against Larry Taylor during the trial. Both received sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Jalen Watson and Larry Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. A murder conviction in Indiana can result in a prison sentence of 45 to 60 years, with some cases punishable by life imprisonment or even the death penalty. Prosecutors filed a motion to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence, potentially adding up to an additional 20 years since Amanda Blackburn was pregnant at the time of her death. Davy Blackburn, Amanda's husband and a church pastor, expressed relief that those responsible for his wife's death have been apprehended and will no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Amanda Blackburn's death has touched the hearts of many people, including the chief executive. Her funeral at a Christian church was attended by more than 2,000 individuals. Among those in attendance was Governor Mike Pence. The resident church has set up a donation page to assist with Amanda Blackburn's funeral and medical expenses. Davy Blackburn expressed hope for a judicial system that will wisely handle those responsible for his family's immense pain. Remarkably, he has consistently reported that he has chosen to forgive Amanda's killers. "I was very relieved to learn of the arrest," he told reporters. "Although everything inside me wants to hate, be angry, and despair, I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Danilo Cavalcante. On July 3, 1989, a child was born in the municipality of Esto in the state of Maranhão, Brazil. The boy was given the common Portuguese name, Danilo. This child experienced a tough upbringing. He wasn't spoon-fed or comforted with bedtime stories. No one took him by the hand to school when he reached school age. Instead, like many children in his impoverished neighborhood, he grew up on the streets. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is marked by oppressive poverty, low living standards, and high unemployment. All these factors contribute to a thriving street crime culture. When growing up in such conditions, amid dirt, poverty, and lack of basic human necessities, one's instincts for self-preservation kick in. People survive as best they can, or choose to. Unfortunately, most often someone who has known only violence from childhood may take the same violent path since they know no other way. Our story today delves into horrific brutality and relentless obsession that can destroy lives. Such events unfolded recently. In 2019, Sarah Brando eagerly awaited the arrival of her younger sister Deborah and her two nephews, Ian and Yasmin, at the airport. After a failed relationship with her children's father, Deborah, who was 30 at the time, driven by a genuine desire to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly adapted to their new environment, enjoying their cozy home and improved living standards. Deborah Brando and her sister Sarah were inseparable. They worked together at a cleaning service and often stayed connected via phone calls throughout the day. Their lives were quiet and happy as they embraced their newfound circumstances in another country. However, an unexpected acquaintance altered their destinies forever. In 2020, while spending a day off with her children at a park, Deborah met Danilo Cavalcante, a compatriot who was 31 years old at that time. A trusting relationship swiftly developed between them. Danilo was attentive and kind to both Deborah and her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor Danilo Cavalcante and believed she had found a dependable partner. After several months into their relationship, they rented a small house together and began living as one cohesive family unit. After some time, Danilo, whose temperament was often hot and emotional, began to lose interest in the apparent perfection of their family life. As he grew closer to Deborah, his jealousy and obsession intensified. Mistrust without basis gradually transformed into a need for total control over the relationship. Frequent conflicts erupted between the couple, often culminating in violence. Danilo would drink heavily every night and return home as a completely different person, almost like an angered animal. He demanded complete submission and obedience from Deborah, punishing her severely in front of their children when she resisted. Despite her strength and efforts to defend herself and protect her children, the situation became untenable for Deborah. Unable to endure such treatment any longer, she moved back to her sister's home. After numerous threats from Danilo, Deborah sought protection by going to the police and subsequently obtaining an order of protection from the court that prohibited him from approaching her. Despite her attempts to distance herself from him, Danilo pursued her aggressively, often resorting to threats of violence if she even considered ending their relationship permanently. Fearing for her safety, Deborah decided to investigate Danilo's background. She reached out to acquaintances in Brazil through social media and unearthed startling information about his past life and his reasons for coming to the United States. To her shock, she discovered that Danilo was not who he had claimed to be. On November 5, 2017, in Brazil, Danilo had fatally wounded a 20-year-old student named Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis by shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in Figueroa for something as trivial as a car repair debt. Investigation revealed that the two men were friends before this tragic incident occurred. Following the crime, Brazilian authorities issued an arrest warrant after granting the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention. However, Danilo managed to leave Brazil through Brasilia International Airport due to procedural disagreements within the judicial system that delayed registering this decision in the National Warrant Registry. This discovery left Deborah stunned as she realized how much danger she was truly in by merely being associated with Danilo Cavalcante. It wasn't until 7 months after the crime that Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. In June 2018, a warrant for his arrest was issued in Brazil. On entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. Upon discovering Danilo's true identity, Deborah issued an ultimatum: leave her alone, or she would reveal his identity. Unfortunately, this decision proved fatal. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children outside her house. The children were playing catch-up while Deborah chatted quietly with an elderly neighbor. When Danilo Cavalcante approached and pulled Deborah aside for a conversation, the neighbor looked on but did not intervene. The discussion initially appeared calm. However, at one moment, Cavalcante produced 2 knives and attacked her. Deborah fell to the ground as he stabbed her multiple times. Despite her children's pleas for him to stop hurting their mother, he continued in a frenzy, inflicting a total of 38 stab wounds. A neighbor witnessing this brutal act attempted to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding, while Deborah's daughter ran to get help and call emergency services. Deborah Brendo was rushed to a hospital but succumbed to her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to evade capture and remained on the run for several hours until apprehended by Virginia State Police. He was extradited back to Pennsylvania and placed under arrest pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder commenced. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante had refused to accept the end of their relationship and had been intimidating Deborah through regular domestic violence since 2020. During the trial, Deborah's sobbing child testified, recounting repeatedly the terrifying events of that day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to convict Cavalcante guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Following the verdict announcement, Cavalcante was transferred to Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he awaited transfer to a federal prison. On August 31, 2023, around 9 a.m., an inmate managed to escape from Chester County Jail. Utilizing a chimney, he scaled the wall between two narrow hallways and ascended through the chimney to the roof. Avoiding the barbed wire fences, he broke free. Surveillance footage captured him in the tight space between two walls in the exercise yard. He used his arms and legs to ascend upward, eventually running across the roof. From there, he climbed over the fence and pushed through the barbed wire to gain freedom. Prison officials were well aware of vulnerabilities identified after Igor Bolta's escape and believed they addressed them adequately. Officials thought that adding barbed wire after a similar escape attempt by an inmate named Igor Bolta just months earlier would prevent any jailbreaks. Acting Warden Howard Holland stated that according to court documents in May, inmate Igor Bolta had climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location, but was captured less than a mile from the prison, with it about 5 minutes. In response to this urgent matter, the prison was closed, initiating a massive search for Danilo Cavalcante, considered particularly dangerous. Alerts were issued everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, with black hair and possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of such a dangerous felon gained significant media attention. The search for this fugitive was broadcast daily across all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police Chief, overseeing the search, held regular press conferences and briefings, providing residents with precise information about this special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role through vigilance and observation to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. About a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was seen by camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township in Chester County. A local resident saw the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued and the perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, tall fields, high grass. A lot of cover for a guy who is 5 feet tall and 120 pounds. Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, stated on September 5th that in addition to tough terrain, searchers had difficulty with extreme heat and humidity lasting for several days. After a week of desperate searches for Cavalcante, the number of officers involved grew from 250 to almost 400. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in equipment. Helicopters flying over began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother, begging him to surrender peacefully. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in and set up a new perimeter around this facility and Longwood, as well as nearby schools. These areas will be closed while search efforts continue. Police conducted an intensive search over several days until eventually Longwood Gardens briefly reopened with limited access before being forced to evacuate and close again following another sighting of Caval. On September 7th, law enforcement doubled the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, tension was palpable. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose. Yet, authorities had not disclosed how Cavalcante escaped from prison. In Chester County, Philadelphia residents were instructed by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported that 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison. The intense search pressed on until a significant development occurred on September 9th. Cavalcante somehow managed to breach the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens. He was seen on a video intercom, standing on a porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, almost 20 miles northeast of the search area. Cavalcante cleverly altered his appearance. He shaved and donned new clothes, and remained undetected as he moved across the state. He stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville with hopes of getting help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, authorities discovered an abandoned stolen van with an empty gas tank in a field in suburban East Nantmeal. The search area then shifted to the northern part of Chester County. Cavalcante's movements once again prompted changes to the search perimeter on September 11th. As investigators continued their efforts, Cavalcante was listed on Interpol's Most Wanted list, and the reward for information regarding his whereabouts was increased further. That night, emergency services received an urgent call from a local resident who reported that a man matching Cavalcante's description had broken into his garage. In self-defense, the homeowner fired multiple shots and hit him 7 times. Surprisingly, Cavalcante managed to escape and stole a .22 caliber rifle with both scope and flashlight attachments. Police arrived swiftly at the scene and discovered Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes nearby. Once they confirmed his identity and recognized that this dangerous felon was now armed, local authorities urged residents in South Coventry to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors whenever possible. This fugitive remains particularly dangerous, and his escape has deeply concerned area residents. Several school districts even cancelled classes as precautionary measures to ensure safety. On the day after Cavalcante was seen on surveillance video, police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. A new search perimeter set up in South Coventry Township, which was tighter than before, because authorities believed Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. However, due to bad weather, the police had to wait until sunrise to approach, as the surveillance plane could not operate safely. The significant breakthrough occurred in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities found out that a security alarm went off just after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Biven, an officer of illicit drug enforcement, the aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal around 1 a.m., shortly after the alarm was triggered. Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain, mentioned that technology played a major role in this operation. He said law enforcement faced many challenges for a long time, but managed to pick up the heat signet from a DEA spy plane just in time. At around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, tried to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth. However, a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Biven stated at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. Cavalcante was questioned by the police immediately after his capture. He revealed that he survived on watermelons and creek water and traveled only at night. He even admitted he almost got caught by an officer while hiding at one point. His plan was to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following his capture, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to all law enforcement officers who assisted in the search for high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante. Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the multitude of challenges that law enforcement officers faced during the operation to locate Cavalcante. He highlighted the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search. Additionally, he noted that each of the search perimeters was established in heavily wooded areas. The search team was composed of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, who thoroughly searched the area around the escape scene. In the wake of Cavalcante's escape, police set up a perimeter spanning several miles in each direction. The Chester County Jail Board, responsible for overseeing the jail, faced heavy criticism from local residents for their failure to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents pointed out that the jail had previously been given an opportunity to implement necessary security improvements after Egor Bolte's attempted escape on May 19th. Those enhancements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape, since he used the same method as Bolte did. Following this incident, the prison has already terminated the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape. Prison officials stated that this guard had a chance to spot Cavalcante during his breakout. In response to public concern, and days after capturing the fugitive, Chester County Jail announced they had installed a tin roof over the area where Cavalcante scaled 2 walls to access and eventually escaped from the facility. Alongside this measure, various other security enhancements and improvements were also implemented. Clearly, there are questions that Chester County officials will need to address regarding how the suspect managed to escape, especially considering this prison's history, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He emphasized how crucial communication and cooperation among all law enforcement agencies and local residents were during this extensive search effort. Thanks to these combined efforts, Danilo will now never go free again.